She stood at the edge of the busy street, watching people rush in and out of the cafe as if they carried the whole world in their hands. Her clothes were warm, her shoes scraped thin, and her stomach had been empty long enough that even the faint smell of baked bread drifting from the cafe made her dizzy. For a moment, she wondered if stepping forward was a mistake. Maybe they would look at her the same way others did, like someone who didn't belong anywhere. But hunger was stronger than fear, and she finally gathered the courage to move. She pushed open the cafe door slowly, as if afraid the sound would get her thrown out. Warmth spilled over her the moment she stepped in. There was laughter, the clinking of cups, and a soft hum of conversations overlapping each other. Music played faintly from a speaker in the corner. She stood still, unsure whether to speak or walk away. Nobody noticed her at first. She was just another quiet figure trying to blend into the background. Her eyes scanned the room. She wasn't looking for a place to sit. She wasn't looking for attention. She was simply searching for the courage to open her mouth. When she finally did, her voice came out softer than she expected. "Excuse me, can I please have something to eat?" It wasn't a demand. It wasn't even a request filled with expectation. It was the voice of someone who had run out of options, someone who had learned that you only ask when you truly have no other choice. A few customers turned to look at her. Some raised their eyebrows. Others exchanged quick glances, the kind people used when they weren't sure whether to feel pity or annoyance. The cafe was not the kind of place where people usually asked for food. Most customers here came to enjoy warm drinks and cheerful evenings, not to witness someone struggling to stay upright. Behind the counter, the owner paused. He was wiping a tray, barely paying attention, but her words made him glance up. She could see the hesitation in his face. He wasn't unkind, but he was also used to people asking for things without giving anything in return. He studied her for a moment, trying to decide what to do. "Are you alone?" he asked. She nodded quietly. "You hungry?" He added, though he knew the answer. Another small nod. The owner sighed. Not out of irritation, just out of habit. He had a business to run. He had seen many people come in with stories, some true, some made up. He didn't want to embarrass her, but he also didn't want to be taken advantage of. A group sitting near the counter overheard the conversation. One of them whispered, "Probably just wants free stuff." Another chuckled softly, not trying very hard to hide it. She heard it, but she didn't react. She had heard worse. The owner placed the tray on the counter and folded his arms. "Look, I can't just hand out food. I'm sure you understand." Her heart dropped a little, but she nodded politely. She did understand. She wasn't angry. She was simply tired. But then he pointed to the old upright piano sitting at the far end of the cafe. It had been there for years, mostly used by aspiring musicians during open mic nights. Today it was silent, just part of the furniture. "If you can play something on that," the owner said, half serious and half joking, "I'll get you something to eat." He didn't expect anything from her. The customers didn't either. A few people turned in their chairs, amused by the idea. A couple of them even smiled, anticipating a clumsy attempt or a simple collection of random notes. The girl looked toward the piano. For a second, something flickered in her eyes, something the owner didn't catch, but the room would soon never forget. She didn't rush. She didn't show excitement. She just gave a small nod, as if accepting a challenge she already knew the outcome of. "All right," she said quietly. The owner blinked, surprised she agreed so quickly. "You sure?" he asked. She nodded again. "Yes, I can try." Some customers leaned back in their seats, crossing their arms, as if preparing to be entertained. Others whispered, wondering what she would do. Nobody expected anything special. To them, she was just a hungry girl trying her luck. She walked toward the piano slowly, each step gentle and hesitant, like she didn't want to disturb the world around her. Her hands were slightly shaky, not from fear, but from exhaustion. When she reached the piano bench, she paused, letting her fingers rest on the edge of the instrument. She closed her eyes for a moment. The noise of the cafe wrapped around her, the laughter, the clatter of dishes, the soft rustle of clothes. She let it all fade away until the only thing she could feel was the familiar shape of the piano keys in front of her dot. Her fingers hovered above the surface, trembling slightly. She hadn't played in a long time. Life had pulled her away from many things she once loved, and music was one of them. But she still remembered what it felt like to let her heart speak through sound. No one in the cafe knew any of that. To them, she was still just a stranger, just a girl who asked for food. Someone in the back whispered, "This should be interesting." Another responded, "She probably can't play a single note." A soft laugh followed. The girl didn't turn to look at them. She didn't need to. She knew the sound of doubt well enough. She placed her fingers gently on the keys. They were cold at first, but familiar. The piano wasn't in perfect condition. Some notes had lost their crispness, and the wood carried the marks of many years. But to her, it felt like home. She took a slow breath. Across the cafe, the owner watched her with mild curiosity. He didn't expect anything more than a simple melody, maybe a few practiced notes. The customers watched with the same mindset. They saw a fragile girl with no background, no chance, no reason to impress them. But the girl wasn't thinking about impressing anyone. She wasn't thinking about the food she hoped to receive. She wasn't thinking about the eyes on her or the whispers behind her. She was thinking about something much deeper every moment in her life, when music had been her only comfort, her only escape, her only friend. Her fingers pressed down on the first key. The sound was soft, almost hesitant, like a whisper breaking through silence. Then the next note, and the next. People leaned forward slightly. Something about the way she touched the keys felt different, not forced, not random, but full of emotion. The owner's eyebrows lifted a little. A few customers stopped their conversations mid-sentence. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't trying to be dramatic. Every key she pressed seemed to hold a story. Every sound carried a feeling she could not put into words. Her hunger, her loneliness, her memories, they all shaped the melody. And though she hadn't played in a long time, her hands still remembered every movement, every rise and fall, every delicate pause. The cafe grew quieter as more people noticed. The whispers faded. The laughter softened. Even the sound of cups being set on tables seemed to pause. She continued to play, letting the music flow through her like a warm stream. The melody wasn't loud or grand. It wasn't something you'd hear on a big stage or at a concert hall. But it held something more powerful than technical skill, sincerity. People listened, really listened, for the first time since she entered the cafe. The room saw her not as a hungry girl or a stranger, but as someone carrying a piece of beauty they hadn't expected to witness. And though she had come begging for food, the first notes she played were already feeding something inside everyone who heard them. She played until the last note faded softly into the air, and when she finally lifted her hands from the piano, she realized the cafe had fallen completely quiet. For a moment, she couldn't tell if that was a good sign or a bad one. She didn't turn around right away. She just sat there, letting her hands rest in her lap, breathing slowly as if she were waking up from a long dream. Behind her, the customers who had been laughing earlier now sat frozen. The amusement on their faces had vanished somewhere between the first note and the last. Some of them still looked surprised, others thoughtful, and some simply confused about how someone who looked so fragile could play with such deep emotion. The owner leaned against the counter. staring at her with a different expression than before. It wasn't pity or annoyance now. It was something closer to respect, though even he didn't seem to realize it yet. A soft murmur spread through the room. Someone whispered, "Did you hear that?" Another replied, "She plays better than half the musicians who come here." Someone else shook their head in disbelief. The girl didn't react to any of it. She finally stood up slowly, unsure of what to do next. She hadn't come here to impress anyone. She had only wanted food, something small to keep her strength up. She turned back toward the owner, expecting him to dismiss everything she had done. She prepared herself for the possibility that he might still refuse her request. She had learned that sometimes people stayed cold even when you gave them a piece of your heart, but the owner wasn't cold anymore. He looked at her differently now, almost as if he were seeing her for the first time. He didn't speak right away. He just let out a slow breath, as if he were gathering the right words. That was unexpected. He finally said. The girl lowered her eyes. "I hope it was enough for a little food." She spoke shyly, without confidence. Not because she didn't believe in her ability, but because life had taught her that talent didn't always guarantee kindness. The owner blinked. "Enough? You gave everyone in here something to think about." He glanced at the customers, who were still watching her closely. "Yeah," he added softly, "you earned a meal." More than that. Her shoulders loosened just a little, a tiny drop of relief showing through the fear she carried. She nodded gently. "Thank you." The owner walked toward the kitchen without another word. She waited quietly, unsure whether she should stay where she was or sit down somewhere. A few customers exchanged glances. One of them smiled at her, a warm, gentle smile, not the mocking one from earlier. Another nodded in appreciation. Still, she felt awkward standing in the middle of the room, so she stepped aside and moved toward a corner where she wouldn't disturb anyone. The room slowly returned to life, though the atmosphere had changed completely. Conversations resumed, but they were quieter now, thoughtful, almost respectful. She rested her hands against the table near her. They were still trembling slightly from the emotion of playing. It had been a long time since she'd touched a piano. She hadn't expected the music to come out the way it did. It felt as though the moment she touched the keys, everything inside her had opened up and poured out without her control. While waiting, she watched the people in the cafe. Some were still whispering about her performance. A group near the window talked openly, saying things like, "Where did she learn to play?" And someone should help her. Their voices carried across the room. But she didn't let herself hope for anything more than the meal she had been promised. The owner finally came back, carrying a plate of warm food. It wasn't fancy, but to her it looked like the most generous thing anyone had offered in a long time. He placed it on the table in front of her. "Here," he said gently. "Take your time." She hesitated before sitting down. Something in her still feared that the plate would be taken away if she moved too quickly. But when she finally sat, the warmth rising from the food made her eyes sting a little. She whispered, "Thank you," again, and this time her voice almost cracked. The owner didn't say anything else. He just nodded and walked back to the counter, but his expression had softened. He wasn't just a cafe owner now. For the moment, he was someone who understood that kindness didn't always come from grand gestures. Sometimes it came from something as simple as a warm plate. The first bite felt unreal. She had eaten so little for so long that having a full meal in front of her felt like a dream she might wake from. She ate slowly, carefully, almost reverently. Each bite felt like it was bringing her back to life. As she ate, she noticed people still watching her. Not in a rude way, not in the way people stare at someone they look down on. They watched with curiosity, maybe concern, maybe admiration. One of the customers, a man sitting near the center of the room, finally stood up and walked toward her. He approached slowly, making sure not to startle her. When he reached her table, he spoke softly. "You play beautifully," he said. "Where did you learn?" She looked up, surprised that someone wanted to talk to her. She hesitated before answering. "I used to play when I was younger. Someone taught me." She didn't explain more. It was easier to leave the past blurry. The man nodded as if he understood. There was more to her story than she was willing to share. "You should be performing somewhere," he said, "not wandering around hungry. You have real talent." She didn't know how to respond. Compliments weren't things she received often. She simply lowered her gaze and whispered, "Thank you." Another customer walked over, a woman holding a cup of tea. "You touched everyone in this room," she said warmly. "You should be proud of that." The girl didn't know what to say. She wasn't used to praise, especially from strangers. She nodded politely. More customers approached her one by one, sharing kind words, asking gentle questions, or simply offering small smiles. It was overwhelming, but in a comforting way. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel invisible. The owner watched all of this from behind the counter, feeling a small sense of pride he hadn't expected. He had seen many musicians play on that old piano, some good, some average, some forgettable. But none of them had shaken the room the way she did. He finally stepped out from behind the counter and walked toward her again. "If you ever need a place to play," he said, "you can come back here. The piano's always open." Her eyes widened slightly. "Really?" He nodded. "You've got something special. People should hear it." She wasn't sure how to respond. Gratitude built in her chest, warm and heavy. "Thank you," she murmured again, because it was the only thing she could say without her voice breaking. The owner smiled softly, the kind of smile that didn't try to make her feel small. "Just take care of yourself," he said. The girl returned to her meal, but now every bite tasted different, not just like food, but like hope. She finished slowly, not wanting the moment to end too quickly. When she finally stood up, she felt stronger than she had when she walked in. She looked at the piano one more time before leaving. It seemed ordinary, like any old instrument sitting in a corner. But to her, it felt like a doorway that had just opened a little dot as she stepped outside. The cool air hit her face, but she didn't shiver. Something inside her felt warm. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know how long this small piece of kindness would last. But for the first time in a long while, she felt like maybe, just maybe, life wasn't finished giving her chances, and all she had done was ask for food. She walked down the street with slower steps than before, not because she was tired now, but because she finally had enough strength to breathe properly. The warm meal inside her felt like fuel she had been missing for far too long. Even the air outside felt different, lighter, softer against her face. She didn't know if she should smile, but a small part of her wanted to. The city around her kept moving fast. Cars rushed by. People talked loudly on their phones. Stores played music through open doors, and buses roared past with their usual noise. Yet she felt separated from all of it, as if she was walking inside a quiet bubble that the world couldn't break. She kept thinking about the piano, about how her fingers had moved without fear, about how the melody flowed out of her like it had been waiting for the right moment. She hadn't expected it to feel so natural. She had gone into the cafe only to ask for food. She had not imagined she would end up opening a part of herself she thought she had lost. She took a deep breath, letting the cold air fill her chest. She didn't know where she was going next. She didn't have a home waiting for her, or a place where someone would greet her. But something inside her had changed. A small spark had been lit, and even a tiny spark could make darkness feel less threatening. As she walked, she reached a small park. It wasn't fancy or well kept, but it had a few benches and a wide tree that spread its branches like open arms. She sat under it, letting her back rest against the rough trunk. The ground was cool, and the grass tickled her hands. From here, she could watch the street clearly. People passed by without noticing her, and she didn't mind. She had spent years being invisible. She closed her eyes for a moment. Her mind drifted to memories she rarely revisited. She remembered the first time she had ever touched a piano. She had been young then, small enough that her feet didn't reach the floor when she sat on the bench. Someone she cared about placed her hands on the keys and told her, "Let the music talk for you." She didn't fully understand it then, but the idea stayed with her. She remembered practicing for hours, learning how each sound connected to another, learning how her thoughts could turn into melodies. She remembered how alive she felt every time she played. But she also remembered when things changed, when life became harder, when everything she loved felt too heavy to carry. She opened her eyes again and sighed softly. She didn't want to get lost in the past. Not today. Today had been different. Today had given her something she didn't expect. While she sat quietly under the tree, she noticed a small group of children playing with a ball nearby. Their laughter echoed in the park. For a moment, she watched them with gentle eyes. Children always seemed to have a way of making the world look simpler. Their joy was so pure, untouched by the weight adults carried. One of the children accidentally kicked the ball too far, and it rolled to where she was sitting. The child ran after it and stopped when he saw her. For a moment, he hesitated, unsure whether to approach her dot. She picked up the ball and rolled it toward him with a small smile. "There you go," she said softly. The child smiled back, a pure and natural smile, and ran back to his friends without a single judgmental thought. She watched them play a little longer. In their carefree movement, she felt a brief reminder of what life used to feel like: light, warm, uncomplicated. After some time, she stood up again. The park was peaceful, but she knew she couldn't stay there forever. She brushed the dirt off her clothes and started walking once more. The afternoon light was slowly fading, painting the sky with soft colors. She didn't know if the cafe owner meant his offer, or if he had said it just out of kindness in the moment. She didn't know if the customers who spoke to her meant what they said, but she knew the piano had felt real. The silence afterward had been real. The feeling in her chest had been real. As she made her way down the sidewalk, she wandered into a quieter part of the city. The buildings were older here, the streets narrower. Most people didn't pass through this area unless they lived nearby. She liked it better this way. The fewer people around her, the less she had to worry about being judged. She found a small bench near a closed shop and sat down again. The sun dipped lower, and the streetlights flickered to life. She wrapped her arms around herself to stay warm. A part of her wondered what would happen if she went back to the cafe tomorrow. Would the owner still welcome her? Would the customers remember her? Would she even get a chance to touch the piano again? She didn't want to get her hopes too high. Hope was a tricky thing. It lifted you up only to let you fall if you weren't careful. But even with her cautious heart, a small part inside her whispered that maybe she should try Dot as she sat there thinking. A woman walked past her with a grocery bag. The woman glanced at her briefly, offering a polite nod before continuing down the street. That simple gesture, something small and ordinary, made the girl feel noticed, not judged, not pitied, but simply seen. Sometimes that alone felt like a rare gift. A cold breeze picked up, nudging her to move. She stood again, her feet aching slightly from walking so much. She continued walking until she reached a quieter corner of the city where a few old apartment buildings stood. She found a sheltered spot near one of the entrances, a place where she had slept before on colder nights. It wasn't comfortable, but it was safe enough. She sat down, pulling her knees close to her chest. The night air felt sharper now, but she was used to it. She leaned her head against the wall and closed her eyes. As she drifted into thought again, she kept replaying the moment when she touched the piano keys. The first note she played echoed in her mind. It wasn't perfect, but it had come from her heart. She hadn't planned the melody. She had simply felt it. She wondered why music had stayed in her, even after everything else had faded away. She wondered why her hands remembered something her life had forced her to forget. Maybe it was because music was the one thing that never abandoned her. Even when people did. Even when circumstances changed. Even when she had nothing else. She pulled her thin jacket closer to her body. Her stomach was no longer hurting, and that alone made the night feel easier to face. But it wasn't just the food that gave her comfort. It was the kindness behind it. It was the moment when people listened to her without expectation. It was the soft applause in their silence. It was the way the room had changed because of her sound. She didn't know why it mattered so much. But it did. After a while, her eyes grew heavy, and she let herself rest. The city sound softened into a distant hum. A car passing here, footsteps there, a door closing somewhere across the street. Everything blended into one soft mixture of noise. As she sat there, half awake, half asleep, another thought filled her mind, one that she hadn't dared consider for a long time. What if she could play again, not just once? Not just for food, but because she wanted to. What if she could let music be part of her life again? The idea frightened her. Things like dreams had never been kind to her. But it also warmed her. It made her heartbeat feel stronger. She closed her eyes fully now, letting the night wrap around her. Maybe tomorrow, she whispered softly to herself. Only the wind heard her. And somewhere inside her, a quiet hope answered back. Here is part 4 of the story. Part 4. The studio lights dimmed slowly as the teenager stepped away from the piano, her hands trembling slightly from the intensity of her performance. She had just played the piece that the renowned maestro himself had failed to complete on live television, and the echo of her final notes still hung in the air like a soft reminder that something extraordinary had just happened. She didn't look at the maestro right away. Her heart was beating too fast, her breath shaky, and her thoughts scattered. She had walked into the show expecting nothing more than a chance to play a few notes. Instead, she had stood in front of a full studio audience and surprised everyone. Including the man who had mocked her moments earlier, the audience remained silent for a long moment, almost as if they were unsure whether they were allowed to react yet. Then, one clap broke through the stillness. Another followed, and then the entire room erupted into applause. The teenager felt her chest tighten with emotion as she finally allowed herself to breathe again. She didn't smile yet. She didn't know if she should. From the side of the stage, one of the assistant producers whispered to another, their expression stunned. They couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. This wasn't rehearsed. This wasn't planned. This wasn't some dramatic twist the show had prepared. It was simply a moment that came from pure talent. The teenager finally lifted her head and looked toward the maestro. He was staring at her with an expression she couldn't fully read, part disbelief, part embarrassment, part something else entirely. The camera zoomed in on him, capturing every shift in his eyes, every small twitch in his mouth. He had mocked her earlier. He had spoken to her as if she were a child pretending to understand music. He had even challenged her to play a piece that he himself had once struggled to perform in public. And she had done it. Not just played it, but played it beautifully. The host of the show approached her with a stunned smile plastered on his face, his voice shaky as he spoke into the microphone. That was unbelievable. Truly unbelievable. How long have you been playing the piano? He asked. The teenager shifted awkwardly, unsure of how to stand when so many eyes were on her. Her voice was soft when she finally replied. "Since I was 6, she said, "and you learned that piece on your own?" The host continued. She nodded. The audience gasped again, some whispering to each other. The host's eyebrows shot up in disbelief. The cameras shifted once again to capture her expression. "Do you know what you just did?" he asked. The teenager looked down at the piano, her fingers still resting lightly on the polished surface. "I just played," she said. But everyone in the room knew it wasn't just that. It was the confidence, the control, the emotion she had placed into every note. It was the boldness of accepting a challenge. From a man who had spent his entire life in the world of classical music, this wasn't a simple performance. It was a statement. The maestro finally stood up from his chair. The audience quieted instantly. All eyes turned to him, waiting to hear what he would say. The teenager's heart sank slightly. She didn't know if he was angry, embarrassed, or simply shocked. He stepped toward her slowly, almost cautiously, as if he were approaching something fragile and powerful at the same time. His footsteps echoed softly across the stage. When he finally reached her, he stopped only a few steps away. He looked directly at her, his expression thoughtful. "That piece," he began, his voice lower than before, "is one of the most difficult compositions written for piano. Many attempt it. Few master it. And fewer still perform it with the emotion you just displayed." The teenager swallowed nervously. She didn't know what this meant. She didn't know if he was praising her or preparing to criticize her. "You played it," the maestro continued, "with a level of maturity that I have rarely witnessed from someone your age, or even older." A soft wave of whispers rushed through the audience. The host looked amazed. The teenager shifted, unsure of what to say. Then the maestro added something that surprised everyone. "I owe you an apology," he said. The entire studio froze. Even the cameras stopped moving. The teenager stared at him, not expecting those words at all. The maestro took a deep breath before continuing. "I misjudged you. I saw a young girl walking onto the stage and assumed your talent couldn't possibly match the confidence you showed when you stepped up to the piano. I let my ego speak instead of my experience." The audience watched silently. "But you proved me wrong," he said, "and I am grateful that you did." For a moment, the teenager didn't know what to respond with. Her voice caught in her throat, and she stared down at her hands. She didn't want to embarrass him further, nor did she want to say something that sounded ungrateful. Finally, she managed a small, quiet reply. "Thank you," she said. The maestro nodded, his expression softening. "Would you?" He paused, looking almost unsure. "Would you allow me to hear you play again? Not here, not for the cameras, but in private. I want to understand how you play the way you do." The audience murmured again, this time louder, filled with surprise. The host's jaw nearly dropped. The teenager blinked, surprised by the offer. She hesitated for a moment. "Why?" she asked gently. The maestro's answer was simple. "Because you have something rare," he said, "and I want to learn from it." Those words struck something deep inside her. She had always dreamed of being seen not as a child who played well, but as a musician. And hearing those words from someone like him made her feel like, for the first time, she truly belonged in the world she loved. But before she could answer, the host stepped forward again, sensing the moment and trying to bring the show back into its usual rhythm. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said excitedly, "I think we just witnessed something unforgettable tonight." The crowd cheered again. The teenager looked out at the audience. Their faces were bright, their expressions warm. She could feel their support, like a soft blanket wrapped around her. But she also noticed something else. Behind the applause, behind the flashing lights, behind the excitement, there was a quiet truth. This moment wasn't about fame. It wasn't about proving someone wrong. It was about the music she had played because she loved it. Because the piano had always felt like home to her. And whether or not she played again on camera didn't matter. But the maestro's offer meant something special. It meant a door had opened. One she had never expected to reach so soon. She lifted her head and looked at him. "Yes," she said softly. "I would like that." The maestro gave a small, respectful nod. The audience roared with applause again, but the teenager barely heard it. Her heart felt light, her chest warm, and for the first time on that stage, she allowed herself to smile. She stepped away from the piano, not as a nervous teenager anymore, but as someone who had finally been seen. And as the lights brightened and the cameras turned to capture the final moments of the show, she walked off the stage knowing that this was only the beginning of a much bigger journey, one that she never expected, but one she was now ready to face. Part 4 ends here. The moment the girl finished playing, the cafe stayed silent for a few long breaths, as if no one wanted to break the feeling her music had created. It was the kind of silence that happens only when people are deeply moved, when something touches them in a place they didn't expect. Then slowly, the quiet room filled with the soft sounds of people letting out shaky breaths, wiping their eyes, or simply sitting in awe. The owner stood behind the counter, frozen in place, holding a plate he had meant to serve someone. He couldn't take his eyes off the girl at the piano. He never thought she could play like that. He never thought anyone could play like that. A woman near the front covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes bright with tears. A man sitting by the window leaned back in his chair as if the song had emptied all his strength. A small child tugged his mother's arm, asking in a whisper if angels always played music like that. And the girl, still sitting on the bench, looked down at her hands as if she wasn't sure whether she had really done something special. She appeared surprised by her own ability, like someone who knew how to survive but didn't realize she could bring beauty into the world too. The cafe owner finally stepped forward. His voice wasn't sharp anymore. It wasn't mocking. It carried something softer, something honest. "Come here," he said gently. The girl stood from the piano and walked toward him slowly, unsure of what to expect. She was used to rejection, used to people turning her away, used to surviving on scraps. She wasn't used to being treated with respect. But the look on the owner's face was different this time, full of gratitude, not pity. He placed the plate of food on the counter and pushed it toward her. But this time, he didn't offer her a small piece of bread or simple leftovers. He gave her a full meal, warm, fresh, and prepared with care. "You earned this," he said softly. "More than that. You deserve this." The girl thanked him quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. She held the plate as if she feared it might disappear if she blinked. When she took her first bite, her eyes closed, not because she wanted to savor the taste, but because she finally felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: safety. People in the cafe began walking up to her one by one. Each person had something different to say. A man with gray hair told her music reminded him of the song his wife used to play before she passed. A college student told her that hearing her play made him want to chase a dream he had abandoned years ago. A mother said the music helped her feel calm after a stressful week of trying to hold her life together. Every person carried their own pain, their own struggles, their own stories, and somehow her music had reached all of them. She didn't know what to say. She wasn't used to praise. She wasn't used to people thanking her for something. All she had wanted was a little food. She never planned to make anyone emotional or pull memories from their hearts. She simply played because the music lived inside her, and the piano felt like the only place where she could speak her truth. The owner watched all of this from a short distance. Seeing the impact she had made, he realized that what she carried was more than talent. It was a gift. A rare kind. The kind that could change moments, maybe even lives. When the last person stepped away, the owner approached her once more. He rested his hands on the counter and took a deep breath before speaking. "Listen," he said softly. "I don't know what your life has been like. I don't know where you came from or what you've had to go through. But I do know this. You shouldn't be struggling alone. You had something special. People need to hear you. And if you'll allow it, I'd like to help you." The girl didn't answer right away. She looked down at the meal she was finishing, thinking over his words. Trust wasn't easy for her. Kindness always came with a price. But something about how he spoke, how the room responded to her music, and how everyone looked at her without judgment, something in all of that felt different from anything she had experienced before. "What do you mean?" she asked softly. The owner gestured toward the piano. "That old thing has been sitting here for years. Most people just touch a few keys after ordering their meals. No one plays it the way you did. If you'd like, you can come here whenever you want. Play for the customers. I won't force you, and I won't push you into anything. But if you play, I'll make sure you always have food. And maybe we can find more opportunities for you in the future." The girl felt her chest tighten. Not from fear this time, but from hope. A hope she hadn't allowed herself to feel for a long time. Could this really be something good? Something safe? Something real? She wasn't sure yet. But she knew this was the first time someone had offered her a chance without expecting anything harmful in return. Before she could decide, a woman who had been quietly observing the scene approached the counter. She carried a small notebook in her hand and a warm smile on her face. She introduced herself as someone who helped organize local community events. She said she had a small stage at a neighborhood gathering taking place the following week. "If you want," she told the girl, "you can perform there. People would love to hear you. It won't be anything big, but it could be a start." The girl stared at her, unsure of what to say. The idea of performing in front of more people frightened her. She wasn't sure she belonged anywhere. But the way the woman spoke felt kind and genuine. She didn't pressure her. She simply offered an opportunity. "I'll think about it," the girl replied softly. The woman nodded with understanding and gave her the notebook, which had a small note inside with details of the event. "Take your time, and if you decide to come, we'll be happy to have you." After the woman left, the girl looked down at the notebook. She had never been given something like this before, an invitation, a chance, a pathway. She held it close, almost afraid someone might take it back. The cafe slowly returned to its normal rhythm. People finished their meals, conversations picked up again, and the world outside continued as usual. But inside the girl's heart, something had shifted. It wasn't loud. It wasn't sudden. It was a quiet change, gentle and warmed out later in the evening. When the cafe became less crowded, the owner approached her once more. "You don't have to decide anything today," he said. "Just remember you're welcome here, anytime." The girl nodded. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel entirely alone. She stepped outside the cafe, holding the notebook and the memory of the music she played. The night air felt different, softer somehow. She looked up at the sky, letting the cool breeze touch her face. For years she had wondered, unsure of where she belonged. But tonight, something changed. She didn't know what her future would look like, but she finally felt like she had a direction, a small spark of hope that could grow if she protected it. With slow, steady steps, she began to walk. Not with fear, not with uncertainty, but with a quiet belief that maybe, just maybe, her story wasn't over, and that the music inside her would lead her somewhere she had never imagined. She had come asking only for food. But what she gave the world that night was far greater. And the path ahead, though still unclear, held possibilities she had never dared to dream of. She didn't just fill her stomach. She touched hearts, opened doors, and unknowingly took her first step toward a future filled with hope, kindness, and the promise of something better.